I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on October 18th, 2019. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you are listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's a link right above the live window there on our live page. And that'll take you to the YouTube instance, and you can log right into the chat room. If you have questions after the fact, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Dean Jones is our host today. Dean is a senior learning expert here at Gallup. Dean, always great to see you on Called to Coach. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We got a little bold this week and said, we'll take any questions that you have for you, Dean.
Anything.
And so AMA is what they call it, Ask Me Anything. And we'll be taking your questions live from the chat room. If you're listening to the recorded version, and after the fact, if you have a question for us, send it to us in an email. I mentioned that at the beginning. We don't get enough of those emails at coaching@gallup.com. And so if you got questions, we'd love to have them for you. But Dean, get us started. You probably got a handful or two of questions in through the Facebook group. Where do we want to get started?
Yeah, no. Well, one is so cool. I'm watching the chat here today, and we've got a truly global audience today. This is what's really, really cool. Is we got people, Patricia from Panama. We've got Ricardo from Venezuela. I'm like, this is dynamite, right? A contingent from the UK. Mm-hmm. We've got Southern California. We got Massachusetts. We got the whole world here, right?
Southern California, cool. its own country now.
When I lived there, I thought so.
Okay.
Yeah. Or should be. I still miss it. So to your point, Jim, sorry, to get us started here. One of the cool things, Jim and I were talking and we were talking about like, what should we do next, right? Like what should we talk about next? The thing that, and Jim suggested, why don't we just throw it open and ask people? So we posted something on Facebook. Jim posted something on Facebook and said, hey, what questions? And so we got some really, really, really cool questions. So what we thought today is that we'd start with some of those questions and comments that we got, right? And read those, and then I'll kind of address some of them. And then as you guys, if those spark other questions or comments, put those in chat. If you've got questions you've been thinking about that you'd like to ask, put those in chat, and we'll just try to, we'll go for an hour and just see how many of them we can get through. And so that, I love this kind of stuff because it's a little free form. I will try not to, I always try to answer questions that I feel like I've got either a point of view on or some expertise in, right? Don't get offended if I don't answer your question. It's probably because I feel like I'm probably not the right person to answer it, right? Like I was at the summit. I think it was, I don't think it was this year. I think it was last year. Somebody asked me a question about well-being and strengths. And they said, can you answer that question? And I said, no, I really should not answer that question.
There's like two people at Gallup who could probably answer.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure I could say something, but I would be making something up. Yeah. Right. So anyhow, so just to dive in, so Dallas Lang asked a question. I'm dealing with these in no particular order. Okay. So Dallas Lang asked a question. He said, I love Dean's material, which obviously is a great start for me. Often listen multiple times to let it sink in. Where I personally get a little stuck is wondering when a group of people are becoming or have become strengths-based. I'm only a year into coaching, so probably my lack of experience here. In my head, it goes like, wow, what Dean describes sounds amazing. I think the group I'm working with is doing that. Wait, no, they're not. Or are they? I suppose my idea here is to give real life examples of what being strengths-based looks like so I can tell how close I am to the goal. I know it's a journey, etc., but looking to know the points on the journey, right? My emphasis is in real life, stories of a day in the life of a strengths-based team. It can't be that every moment you work, it can't be that every moment at work you're talking about strengths, right? Unless you work at Gallup, maybe. Ha, 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 ha. Does that make sense? Perhaps this has been done, right? So I actually love So I read this and I was looking for the ones, right, that like get me, that really spark my thinking around it, or like really, will really provoke me, right? So I started really what Dallas is asking, and I think is such a great question. I think so many people have this question is, what does being strengths-based really look like? And what does it mean really to be strengths-based? Whether you're a strengths-based manager or a strengths-based leader or working on a strengths-based team or in a strengths-based organization. And I think that there's a lot, I do think there's some confusion around that, right? So I think oftentimes, I also spend a lot of time training a segment of our salespeople, our business development folks. And it's one of the things that I always emphasize with them is that strengths-based doesn't mean I did the assessment, right? Or I know my top 5. That sometimes it gets flattened out to, did I do strengths, or did I do the strengths assessment, or do I know my top 5, right?
Or maybe the whole organization has done it, right?
Or even the whole organization.
We have
has done it.
100% of the people who've taken strengths. Probably not, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and it's when people say, "Hey, look, everybody did strengths," I'm always like, first of all, congratulations, because getting people to participate is sometimes no easy feat, and so that's great. That is the first step in being really a strengths-based organization. And so I think it gets collapsed. So it's about the tool rather than strengths. But you got to remember really what strengths is about is not about the assessment. It's about what you do with the assessment, right? So it's about the assessment is designed. I always feel like the assessment is, and maybe I read too many Hardy Boy books as a kid, right? But like, in the Hardy Boy books, when you find the treasure map, that's the beginning of the story, not the end of the story, right? You get the treasure map, and then the journey begins to find the treasure, right? And I always feel that strengths is kind of that way, right? You do the assessment to get the treasure map, right? And then it tells you where to dig. And that's the beginning of the journey of digging, right? And unearthing the treasure. So I always feel like for people, we need to help people understand, okay, yeah, that's the beginning of the journey. It tells me where to go on an individual basis and on a team basis, right? People always think that being strengths-based is the same as talking about strengths, or that talking about strengths is what it means to be strengths-based. And it's kind of like, I always think that's funny because it's always like, it's always a function of self-awareness. Like when you're being efficient, right? Or you're being effective, you're not running around going, look at me, I'm efficient. Look how efficient I am. Look at me, this is efficiency, right? Because if you are thinking that, you're actually not being efficient, right? There's some meta conversation about who you are, right? You're not actually in the moment being efficient. You're sort of observing yourself being efficient, right? And the minute that you get kind of thrown out of flow like that, out of the being present to what you're doing, being present, just doing what you do, expressing yourself, anytime when you're in that kind of meta conversation or that conversation about yourself or about your own self-awareness, it kind of throws you out of all of that, right? I always think that the piece of that that's so interesting is if you've read anything about that Danny Kahneman's read, that has written about the experiencing self versus the remembering self. This is very useful, when we were building some of our assessments, knowing the difference between the experiencing self versus the remembering self. The experiencing self is more accurate, right? If you ask somebody, were you strengths-based, or what percentage of the time were you strengths-based yesterday? People's notion of that will be typically biased or inflated, right? In some way. If you ask people, just talk to me about yesterday and give me specific instances where you used your strengths yesterday, you're more likely to get an accurate answer, right? So I think it's one of those things where in practical terms, as I was thinking about it, the thing that Dallas's comment really sparked for me is I think that when we're in flow, right? When we're in the moment, when we're present and we're just being who we are and doing what we do, right? That we're not thinking about strengths. We're just thinking about who I am, applying and doing and expressing myself fully, right? And when we're in the moment, it's when we get thrown out of flow and we're trying to get back into flow. That's the piece where strength starts to get really useful as a tool, right? So I'm not in flow, right? Something happens that knocks me out of flow, and I'm trying to get back to that point where I'm just expressing myself. I'm just being who I am. I'm present. I'm engaged. I'm just doing what I do. I'm doing my Dean thing, right? But I get knocked out of flow, and I'm trying to figure out like what happened and how do I get back to that point where I'm doing my Dean thing, right? And that's the point where strength starts to be really useful as a tool, right? That's where I start talking about strengths, because I'm talking about, like when you're dealing with a conflict at work. So something's working or you're conflicting with others, or there's a conflict between teams, and we got to navigate that conflict. Or when the team is not collaborating as well as we'd like, right? So we all know, hey, we love each other, we're part of a team, but we know, gosh, we're not collaborating very well here, right? And we want to get back into that flow as a team. So strengths is a useful tool to use for that, right? When we're engaged in a project or a process or a role that's not a great fit for us, and that there's not a great fit because it's sort of I get into flow and I get knocked out. I get into flow and I get knocked out, right? And I know that something's not a great fit here, right? Or something's not happening, but I can't figure out what exactly it is. When we're trying to figure out the best way to do something. So if I say, hey, look, I want to be more efficient, or I want to be more effective, strengths is a great way to do that. It's interesting. So we had our Bentonville coaches meetup last night. So we started 5 months ago. I started with this gal, Sam Reschel, who works in our Chicago office. We decided, okay, we had all these great coaches in Bentonville, and one of the coaches, her name's Brenda Meyer. She's fabulous, certified coach, phenomenal human being, said we should have a coaches meetup in Bentonville, right? And I was like, yeah, we should have a coaches meeting up here, right? Bentonville is the town in Arkansas where I live. And so we have had, the last 5 minutes, we've had this coaches meetup, and it is we have between 10 and 20 people that come every time. And the conversation is so great. And this is a shameless plug that if you don't have a coach meetup in your area, you should start one. Because, there's a woman that came last night and she said, is this an open group or a closed group? And we said, this is an open group. Anyone can come. And she said, what does it cost? And we said, nothing. And she was like, okay, I'll come. It was super sweet.
And they are very easy to start for people, by the way. I'll throw that plug in. Like Dean, to your point, they don't require permission. You don't have to have a capital investment. You don't have to make a website. Just invite people and start getting together. Drink some wine, enjoy some barbecue, whatever is in your area. Just get together and have some conversations. You guys invited me to come and speak at it virtually. And I came in, and you can do those kinds of things. So it's a great idea, Dean. Thanks for promoting.
No, it's great. So anyhow, last night, so we were talking about this a little bit last night. And last night we had a panel of people in organizations that were using strengths, talking about how they use strengths in organizations. And there's this woman that works at Procter & Gamble, who's a strengths coach for about 250 people there. So she's the strengths coach for a division there. Her name's Tanya Weaver. She's phenomenal. She's one of these strengths coaches that every time I'm with her, I learn something. And she was talking about how when people have conflicts, the first thing she does is say, okay, tell me your top 5. Okay, now you tell me your top 5. And, it's the language that helps us get back into, hey, I'm back in flow. I'm back expressing myself. I'm working I'm in sync with other people. The team's in sync. It gives us that shared vocabulary for being able to talk about ourselves and be able to talk about others. And it gives us a vocabulary. I always think this is so important. And this is something that I think is so great for you to be emphasizing with the people that you coach and the teams that you work with. It's a unique vocabulary in that it's a way of talking about our individual differences in a way that's positive, non-judgmental, inclusive, and yet specific, right? So it's a positive way to talk about individual differences at a time when probably the biggest issue in the culture of organizations is diversity and inclusiveness, right? And people are so concerned about, am I being respectful? And rightly so, by the way. Am I being respectful? Am I being inclusive? That having a shared language that's a safe language for people to be able to talk about individual differences in a way that's respectful and positive and inclusive, and at the same time, very specific to people. That's so powerful, right? So the strengths really, I think the part of being strengths based is being able to have this lens, right, or this tool to get us back into flow, back into just expressing ourselves and working together. One of the earliest epiphanies for me about what it meant to be a strengths-based manager is I realized I had been at Gallup. I'd done tons of personal development work. I'd been doing learning work with thousands of people prior to joining Gallup, right? But when I started about 14 years ago at Gallup, I I did strengths shortly after I joined, and I was really interested in this notion of what is it to be a strengths-based manager. And I realized that I was clear about the language part of it, but the piece that I wasn't clear about that was a huge epiphany was that strengths-based managers don't work on what's wrong with people, they work on what's right with people. I mean, it sounds like the most obvious thing, right? But it's an interesting thing in practical application. A lot of managers are using strengths in a way that's really about weakness fixing. So it's funny, I think, when you coach managers, and I hope that you all are coaching managers, because I think that's one of the most significant things you can do to shift the culture of an organization is be working with the managers in an organization. But strengths, a lot of managers in the beginning use strengths as a tool to fix weaknesses. There's a problem with your activator if you're just more patient. And I think we've diagnosed you with a disease, with activator disease. And if we could just fix that activator disease, or, if your deliberative didn't kick in and put on the brakes on everything would be great. Right. And so they're using strengths, but they're using it as a weakness fixing tool. And and just so we're clear, weakness fixing managers are at work on what's wrong with people. Right. And by the way, this doesn't make them bad. uh, you know, so the time honored traditional way of managing people is to figure out what's wrong with them and fix it. You know what I mean? Like we got decades of, you know what I mean? Like where are your gaps? Where are your developmental gaps, and how do I fix those? Right. But what weakness fixing managers do is they're at work on people's mistakes, what their failings are, what their deficiencies are, what their developmental gaps are. They're trying to fix people with training. They're trying to fix people with process or with structures. They're trying to fix people with rules. The latest, honest to God, I see all the time is they're trying to fix people with feedback. So feedback they're using, I think that's why feedback has almost become a dirty word sometimes for people, is because everybody, the answer for a lot of managers and leaders is we need to give people more feedback. But the experience that most people have is the feedback felt punitive, and it did nothing to help me increase my performance.
Well, and managers are using feedback as an excuse not to say it themselves, because it's a hard thing to say sometimes when you have to tell somebody like, hey, there's some things here that we need to change. And that's hard. And a lot of managers who shouldn't be managers like to avoid that. So they hide behind this feedback mechanism, which, well, maybe somebody else will say it for me. And that's kind of being a coward, I think.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot. I think I just in case I get painted into a corner here, I am a proponent of feedback, but I'm a proponent of the feedback that is positive and constructive and helps people to calibrate their strengths better. I really saw you doing this well, Jim. And here's specifically what I saw that really worked about what you're doing. And I'd love to see you do more of that. Right. And when you did this, man, that really, really, really worked. And one of the things I see is how you did it was so skillful. Right. And that's feedback that builds a person up and is tied directly to the expression of their talents and strengths. That's powerful for people. Right. So what strengths-based managers do is they're at work on what's right with people. So they're working on investing on developing people's talents into strengths. Um, as a strengths-based manager, and this is one of the key things I would tell you, as a strengths-based manager, what I'm doing as a strengths-based manager is shaping the job around my understanding of the person, right? Rather than trying to shape the person around my understanding of the job. Okay. So I'm at work on the job, not the person. So I'm understanding the person, but I'm not trying to change that person. I'm trying to understand who they are, what their talents are, what their behaviors are, and I'm helping that person to be able to express those in a more powerful, productive way, and then shaping the job around that person. We all know that no two people in the same job do it the exact same way, right? Is that you can put two salespeople in the exact same job, in the exact same company, in the exact same location, and they are going to do the job in fundamentally different ways based on their talents and strengths, right? And great managers are at work on how do I shape that job around somebody's strengths so it continues to be powerful. I will tell you, over the last couple of years, 2, 3 years, I had the privilege of working closely with our learning design team here at Gallup. And, we had a set of like 12 learning design consultants who were all basically in the same role. But yet, one of the things that was powerful was being able to shape the job around their individual strengths and talents. There's a gentleman that worked in our division who was incredibly talented as a learning design consultant. But one of the things that was interesting is he didn't like working on our standard programs. For him, it was really unfulfilling to sit and work on a program that was going to be disseminated to a broad group of people. He always wanted to work on client specific programs because he loved the process of sitting with a client, listening to them, understanding their needs, and then coming back and building something that was for them, right? There's another gentleman that worked in our learning design team who it's funny, led with a ton of learner and input, right? But loved to be able to understand concepts and translate them into our programs, right? And his joy in life was being able to do that. So he worked on a lot of our standard programs, right? Because he loved being able to just get embedded in the research, understand the concepts, understand how the research came to life, and then bring it to life in a program. Right. There's another woman that worked in our learning design team who she's probably one of the best, one of the most intuitive process people I've ever been around my entire life. Her ability to understand what a process should be and navigate it and help people plug into a process was just extraordinary. Is just extraordinary. And so it was interesting because she ended up with a lot of projects that were about, she was somebody who was involved a lot in our coaches certification because she's really talented at being able to do that. Now, these are all people in the same job, but the job gets shaped in unique ways in order to be able to do that. I know, and by the way, I hear this every time. People often say to me, yeah, we don't have the same latitude, right? And it may not be, I think you gotta, on an assembly line in a manufacturing facility, you don't have the latitude to be able to fundamentally shift somebody's job in that way, right? But it may be the place in the assembly line that you put them, right? Or the additional responsibilities you give them. I also am really sensitive to, in union environments, you have to be very careful about this, right? Because in union environments, a lot of that's negotiated, what somebody does and what we expect of them, right? So I'm clear that it doesn't work necessarily in every single environment, right? But even, I'm like, I'm laughing. One time I was in Reagan National Airport and I was about 2 hours early for my flight, right? And I sat down at this food stand. It was like a Chinese bun place, right? So I'm sitting at the counter, and of course it's me. So I'm talking to people, woo, number 3. I'm talking to people. So I start talking to this woman, and I start asking this woman about her job. And she starts talking to me about her manager and how much she loves her manager. And she had been at this stand for 4 years. And I said, boy, that seems like a really long time to be here. And she said, yeah. She said, most people stay here. Most people stay in these kind of stands. She said, they're lucky if they make it 6 months. And she said, no, I've been here 4 years and I want to be here as long as I can. And it was because of her manager, right? And her manager had, you can see, and then the manager shows up, right? So I start talking to the manager, and you can see the manager has assigned people in this little stand different responsibilities based on what he knew their talents were and what they love to do and like that. And it was all a function of just that he had a great relationship with them. And you could see he was really listening to them. I watched him, so I'm sitting there and I'm practically like, I've quit my job. I'm now working in the stand. You know, like, you know what I mean? I'm in love with these people. I've moved to DC, right? But like he has a stand-up meeting, and I'm listening on the stand-up meeting as he's working with encouraging people and helping people express their talents. It's just the coolest thing. It's just the coolest thing, right?
Yeah.
So
we had a family, my family, I had a family chat this morning just about managers. It was funny. My wife was saying, "Oh, today I got the greatest manager. They're buying pizza for lunch today. This is so great." And my daughter said, "Well, your manager doesn't beat my manager because my manager's cooler. She has tattoos." And then my couple of my boys were like, "My manager's terrible." And it was just an interesting kind of conversation, right? That brings out the dialogue of, you could really sense the tone and how people felt about their engagement based on their manager. It was, I until you started talking about it, it's like, wow, we had this conversation as a family this morning, and how important that is, right?
Yeah, it sounds so funny, but when we think about our primary relationships in life, one of our primary relationships in life is our manager.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get a little psychological, one of the things that we know is that everybody is the template for all your relationships is your family of origin, right? So everybody's working out their relationship with their dad, their mom, and their siblings all the time, right? And one of the things, so you're bringing that to bear. Everybody's working it all out. All those childhood incidents, we're all working them out, right? But it's one of those things. It's one of those primary relationships in your life and the quality of your life. It's why when you change jobs, the most important decision to make is not where am I located or when am I going to be paid, but who's my manager going to be, right? Is this the right manager for me? Is this somebody that I'm going to have that kind of meaningful relationship with? And as organizations change so that they're more developmentally oriented, that it puts even more emphasis on the manager, right? The great question here. Okay, yeah, great.
Can we do that one?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and read it.
You and I are on the same page. You're so cute.
Super great. Any specific thoughts on best ways to coach managers with high restorative? To be more go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just gonna say, here's the thing. We went to a different.
No,
one
I'm
here.
sorry.
Okay, no problem. So, do you have any specific thoughts on best ways to coach managers with high restorative to be more strengths focused? Right. So this is a great question, and this is a great question. The thing the simple thing is, I've known a lot of managers actually with high restorative that are phenomenal managers. Right. The thing that you always want to make sure with managers that are high restorative is people are not the problem, right? So it sounds funny to say, right? But managers with high restorative that point themselves at removing barriers from people can be the absolute best manager to have. Right? Because it's every time I get stuck, every time I get thrown out of flow, right? Every time there's an issue, if I've got a manager that cares, the worst thing sometimes is having managers that don't care about the problems, right? If I have a manager who says, man, I love problems. I love solving problems. Let me get those barriers out of your way. It's oftentimes a lot worse to have a manager who says, don't bring me any of the problems, right? Solve the problems on your own. But having those high restorative managers, the challenge with high restorative managers is sometimes they think the people are the problem, right? So they go to work on fixing the person like the person is the problem. The person isn't the problem, right? It's either the fit of the person to the environment, a fit of the person to the job, the fit of the person to the team, the fit of the person to the organization. There's, there may be an issue, but the person's not a bad person. The person's not the problem. It may be a bad fit. And sometimes, there are times when somebody's just a bad fit and shouldn't be in that job and they should be in a different job. And you don't have another job for them like that in the organization. And the right thing for them to do is to leave the organization, right? And but it doesn't. I think there's ways to do that that are empowering and respectful. So it's never that the person is left with, I was a problem, you know? And so I think that's powerful.
But
right?
to Steve's question here, what are best ways to when someone is underperforming in their role based on whatever standards have been set, how does that conversation go?
Yeah, I think one is, we know that the foundation of engagement for somebody is that they're clear about expectations. We also, when we talk about performance, the first thing that we know there's three things in the domain of performance that you got to get right? You got to establish expectations. You got to be equipped to continually coach people, and you have to create a structure of accountability. And accountability doesn't mean punishment. Accountability means we're counting how many you did, and then we're thinking about what's next, right? So we're doing future-oriented accountability, right? The first piece is establishing expectations. And if there's not clear expectations, sometimes when people are underperforming, the problem is they don't know what's expected of them, right? And that always spirals, right? I can tell you're not happy with me, Jim, but I don't exactly know why. And I'm doing my best, but I'm not clear why you're not happy with me. And that makes me unhappy and more disengaged, right? So when you, as my manager, sit with me and say, okay, this is what we expect. This is what we expect. And this is where we're at, right? And then being able to look, you got to remember the only reservoir that you've got to work with is the reservoir of people's talent, right? So to fix something that's not working, you're not going to work with people's deficiencies. You got to work with people's talent, right? Because that's the power. That's where all the power is. That's where all the charge is. That's all the resource that you've got is people's talent. So great managers are the ones that help them. They understand somebody's talent, and they help people know how to be able to apply their talent in a meaningful way, right? So the first thing we got to do when it's not working is say, let's go back to who you are. So tell me more about your talent. I always think, I've said this before, but I think this makes good managers great. Strengths is like the cheat sheet for managers. Is when you do strengths, you just automatically make all your managers better. Because in an organization is by knowing their own strengths and knowing the strengths of their people, you're giving them the answers to the test, right? They don't have to make up what's going on with somebody. They know who that person is. And particularly if you use it as a starting point then for the conversations with that person, you start to be able to really understand it, right?
Can I tag on real quick? Can I tag on John's question? So how does this play out matrix organizations? And because they seem different. I don't know if they are necessarily that different, but how does that play out, Dean?
Yeah, John, it's great. I mean, if you've been around Gallup, you know that we are about as matrix an organization as you can get, right? Super flat organization. And there will be, like Jim Collison's a perfect example, right? Let's just start there. Jim's got responsibilities in different areas and that are way outside of the sort of traditional definition of the job, right? And that's not uncommon in high matrix organizations where I'm working on a little different projects that have the manager that's the person that's responsible for my development and my performance, my pay, and all those other things may be only tangentially involved in all the different things that I'm doing. Right. So in some ways, I have multiple managers inside the organization because I've got lots of project managers and project leaders that I may be working with in a matrix organization. The challenge with that is oftentimes in matrix organization, the person who's leading the project may not be a manager. Right. So they may not have management talent. They may not have management talent to be able to address things that aren't working. Right. One of the things that I think works very well at Gallup that we do that I suggest to other organizations is when things aren't working, instead of that team leader or project manager trying to intervene with the person, they go back to the person who's that person's direct manager to work with that. Because hopefully that person who's the direct manager has the management talent or some wherewithal to be able to help that person fit in the right way. So I think that is very useful. Right. Doesn't mean that person should hold back on feedback. Doesn't mean that that person should, that we should compromise any of our expectations around this, right? But the other thing is, I think this is part of the thing I was talking before about job shaping. When you work in a matrix like environment, one of the cool things about it is you get opportunities to do a lot of things, right? But you want to be strategic about what projects you're working on and how you're assigned to projects. And particularly you want managers to be working with people to select those projects around what are the ones where I've got unique value, I've got a unique contribution to be able to do that. I literally was just doing this last week with my own manager at Gallup, is looking at, there's 3 kind of areas that I've been working in, core areas, right? And we were looking at those 3 areas, and it was clear, like in one of the areas, I was doing a lot of work, but I don't think the value I was offering was particularly unique value, right? And so one of the things I'm phasing out of that particular area so that I can focus on the other areas where I do offer something really unique. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I even have a unique role where I'm a manager without directly managing anyone. And
Yeah.
so I manage these processes. I manage people indirectly, which is even more of a challenge when I think about I have to think through the lens of how do I bring a strength-based management approach to someone who isn't directly incented to listen to what I say in a lot of ways, right? And so it requires, thank goodness for me, 4 of 5 are influencing themes. And so I just deploy every ounce of influence I have in those teams to get those people to do it. But I have to influence large teams to move or individuals to move and do it in a way that is really maximizing their effectiveness without knowing I don't have any of those traditional management things to fall back on. I have to do it 100% through influence. Mm-hmm. So understanding, knowing how these people are built and put together and the strengths, like you said, cheat sheet. And man, that is just a great example for managers of saying, I can go see someone's top 5 and read right away. Okay, here's what I need to do to really kind of get the influence and the value out of it. It also gives me a great opportunity to recognize people outside of their current management structure. And so, sometimes when it comes from your manager, you're like, okay, well, that's your job, right? To recognize me, that's your job. But when I get the power to be able to recognize people outside of that oftentimes carries more weight, more power, because it's not my job to do that necessarily. So those are some, when we think about matrixed organizations and we think about folks who aren't directly tied to the teams, the people you put in those roles, I think it's just as important they understand that role as well, that
Right.
They're there to inspire and direct and to lead. Just because they don't have a direct straight line responsibility doesn't let them off the hook.
Yeah, that's right on. That's great. Let's knock off. I'd love to do, I'm looking at the time. I'd love to do a couple more of these, 2, 3 more of these if we could, just because I think there's some we could knock off a little bit. Okay. One was Charlotte Blair, my friend Charlotte, asked about the misapplication of strengths and feedback. Right. And I was looking at it I think there's a lot of things that you can talk about in this area. I was looking at, I want to start, we kind of talked about feedback a few minutes ago. I think and address that. I want to talk just more broadly about the misapplication of strengths. And there's some things that I consider kind of warning signs when you're using strengths in, if you will, the wrong way. I think it's hard to, like I was laughing at the coaches meetup last night. I don't think anybody's ever been damaged by strengths, right? You know what I mean? Like I think it's hard to damage people with strengths, right? You know what I mean? You're just too deliberative. You're just too, wooey. But I do think that there's some ways that there are misapplications of strengths. So let me give you some common ones, and I would treat these kind of like warning signs, right? One is when people use strengths as a weapon, right? They're using their strengths against you, and sometimes this happens inadvertently, and sometimes this happens really intentionally. It's like, hey, we can't have you because you're too blah, 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 blah. Or we really need somebody that's got this there. So it's using strengths really as a weapon with people. And there are times, sometimes you see people using it as a club to beat people up, right? You really got to get a handle on your your activator or your whatever it is, right? You really got to handle that. Your includer has become a problem, blah, 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 right? So it's using strengths as a weapon or a club with people. Big warning sign, right? And sometimes, by the way, it's done in a well-meaning way, but it's still a weapon. Okay. So even if you mean well and you want to contribute to that person, it's kind of like, yeah, I beat you down with it anyway. But when people do that, strengths gets a bad name, right? So it's like you're using this tool that's supposed to be developmental and positive and inclusive, and you're using it as a way to really beat people down. Not the right thing. Using strengths as a manipulation is another one. Is when you see people using strengths to manipulate people. It's like, and I think sometimes this comes across well-meaning. It's like, well, if I know Jim and I know his strengths, then I know how to appeal to him. I think that's fine as long as you're transparent around it. When it starts to feel like it's a manipulation, like, hey, we're going to really, like we're going to play this up, so we can really get Jim to do this thing. Strengths as a manipulation is really a misapplication of what this is about. It's you do get to see who somebody is, and you do get to work with somebody, but the people that do this in the most authentic and transparent way are the ones that say, look, I know you're high in communication. I know that's a real gift that you have. And I'd really like to leverage that gift on the work that we're doing together. Right. Or listen, I know that you have woo and significance. Right. And we want to put you center stage here. Right. We know that you love winning people over, and we need that for the team. Right. So, I think that authenticity and transparency around that really makes a difference. Another one that comes up a lot, gosh, again, we were talking about it last night, was using strengths as a label. Sometimes, and we say in our guiding principles that themes are not labels, but sometimes it's like, oh, you're this, that makes you this. Like we all know that. And we know that each expression of each theme is going to be very, very different, that the themes can contain a lot of patterns of behavior, a lot of traits roll up, aggregate up into those themes. So you can't just use themes like a label or, strengths themes like a label to label somebody, right? Using strengths for blame or fault. If you weren't this way, or because of you're this way, we think that's to blame, right? That's also a real misapplication, right? And then finally is using strengths as an excuse for poor performance or failure, or as an excuse not to take on some responsibility that other people are expecting you to have, or failing to fulfill in some responsibility people are using strengths as an excuse. Also a misapplication of strengths. So those are sort of the ones that you commonly see where, no, that's not what strengths was designed for, right? You know what I mean? We did not design it as the ultimate weapon, So, or a way to categorize all human beings so we can put them into boxes, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the intent, right? So Judy Bertotto asked this great question. She said, or asked to talk about tactfully and effectively coaching employees with few or no dominant relationship building talents. And I think, Jim, you were just talking about that a minute ago when you're talking about yourself. I think you've got more than I do. I was like, okay, this is a home run for me. Because if you look at my top 14 themes, I'm basically all influence. And in my top 14 themes, I've got, excuse me, one lonely relationship theme. Right. I have a relator, number 5. Beyond that, like nothing. Right. So I think when you're coaching employees or managers in working with folks that have few relationship themes, here's some things I think here's some guidelines around this. Right. One is to know there's nothing wrong. Okay. So sometimes it's like there's this tendency to deal with the person like they're broken. Okay. There's nothing wrong to be able to do that, right? So, and that's an important thing. We all have our conglomeration. It's always the danger of working with the domains for people is that if you don't have a bunch of talents in a particular domain or a bunch of themes in a particular domain, people start to worry like, am I broken, or is there something wrong with me, or am I lopsided, or something like that? And the other thing is when people look and they see themes across all the domains, they like, okay, I won. This is good. I got the lucky ticket. You know what I mean? So yeah, it doesn't mean anything,
Well,
right?
it's I'm always interested how the domains just destroy people. We spend all this time celebrating uniqueness
Right.
and
Yeah.
focus and all those things that are great about you. And then we bring this domain layer out and people are just ruined. They're like,
Right.
and so as coaches, I really want to encourage that those with individuals, those domains are just as special
Right.
as and roles do not own domains. Like as leaders, I don't have to like strategy is not owned by leaders.
Yeah.
Like that we need leaders with all of those. And
Yeah.
so I see
And
this question a lot in Facebook, Dean, as people are like, but they don't have, and it's such like I said, especially destroys coaches sometimes. It's like they want to go right to the negative again for it. I don't, it's a deficiency. I'm missing this. No. You have it here. And
mhm.
so I think it's a great reminder in what you're saying that you're not broken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the value of the domains is to know where you're going to tend to rely, right? Doesn't mean you don't have it, right? I think when you're coaching people, one is you always want to bolster self-awareness. Coaching is about bolstering self-awareness. So the more that person understands, hey, I'm not going to lead with that. I will tell you, when I did the domains work, this was one of the cool things for me. One of the big epiphanies for me was when I looked at my themes. I had always thought of myself as a people person. And I realized I wasn't so much a people person as in relationships. I was a people person in terms of influence, right? I'm a big influence person, right? Not a big get related person. And it really helped me to be able to see that. So that self awareness really makes a difference, right? You want to understand how that person does create relationships, because the tendency is if they're not, they may have a lot of thinking themes and be creating relationships inside the stuff that they're thinking about or dreaming about or reading about or like that. It may be that they're a big execution person and they're creating relationships inside of the projects that they do, right? They may be a big influence person. And, like I used to tell people for a while, like, listen, I don't really have friends. I have comrades, right? Because I'm always with my influencing themes. I'm always out to make something happen. And the people that are my closest friends are the people that like to make something happen with me. Right. And so, and I have lots of great close friends, but my close friends know this about me, right? Is that I'm happiest in our friendship when we're working together on something, right? Or when we're making a difference or making something happen with people. So I think you want to understand how that person does create relationships, right? The other piece you want to be able to do is get up under the contribution or value that that person brings, right? Couple of the strategies for people that don't have relationship themes. One is the time-honored thing of having a partner, right? So one of my best partners for the last 14 years has been our chief marketing officer, Sherry. Sherry is incredibly talented. And one of the things she leads with, she's got a lot of harmony, but she's also got a lot of includer, right? And so she's great about being able to understand who people are, what's happening, take the temperature of stuff. I always laugh because harmony is my number 34. I always think that was growing up in a big family. You know what I mean? But I do know there are big families where there's lots of consensus. But Sherry's always been a great partner for me to be able to say, oh, here's the temperature, right? Now let's do. And I was a great partner for her because I was always the first one that said, great, let's take this on, right?
She's our Theme Thursday, by the way. Theme Thursday season 2 Harmony is Sherry Tier. So
oh, no way. Oh, that's great.
If you want to go back and see it
Yeah.
and learn from her, that's a great one to go to.
Yeah. Some of my best partners, literally of all time, have been high in harmony. The other thing I think helps is to a system, right? And sometimes I think we think of a system in different ways, but I would create a system that draws on people's reservoir of strengths, right? You want systems that are going to help them, but are tuned into what are the strengths they're going to use to be able to manage this. So, like for instance, if a person is high in learner and input, you should help them with, hey, what questions should you ask people, right? So give them questions. It's one of the things that we do with managers all the time is, hey, use your learner and input, but point that at the people, right? And so that and here's some questions you could ask, right? And generally you start them with questions, they can come up with some more questions. If somebody's high in strategic, right? Help them know what's the outline of the conversation going to look like. So what's that pathway for the conversation, or what's the structure of the conversation? They may not intuitively be able to follow the conversation or like that, or have a sense of it. But if you give them the sense of what the conversation should sort of look like, that helps kind of shape it. Somebody that's analytical is helping that person understand what are the components of an effective conversation, or what creates an effective conversation with somebody. So you can tap into their strengths to help them in a way that's systemic, right? But you got to be tuned in first to what are the strengths that they're leaning into, to know how do you help them to be able to do that, to be able to build relationships in that way, right? And it's a challenge, sometimes it's you want to make sure. For me, one of the things, I lean into my relator all the time. If I have to go do a meeting with a bunch of people, and I know that we're going to have conflict or disagreement, or there's going to be issues, typically I try to, one of my strategies is I get people one-on-one, because I'm just better one-on-one. So I'll sit down with them, I'll understand them, I'll have the conversation with one-on-one, so that I'm walking in the meeting, because I can't sit in the meeting and read all how they're feeling, right? I know how to win them over, but I don't know necessarily how to read them in the meeting. So if I've had the chance to use my relator before the meeting, that's really helpful for me, right? Okay, Jim, do we have time for one more or no?
Let's do one more. Yeah, we'll
Okay.
need to make it quick, but let's do one more.
Okay, so so let's do Cheryl Paces, my friend Cheryl, my KC pal. Okay, she said, my suggestion is hear more about how we help non-certified coaches be coaches for their direct reports, the boss to coach concept, right? So yeah, so I'd love to I'm going to just talk about this briefly. Jim, I'm going to do 3 minutes on this. Okay. I'm going to give you the best 3 minutes I got, and then we'll call it. Okay. So one of the things you got to remember is that we know that managers have the most disproportionate impact in an organization. So if we're going to look at one constituency, like one thing that people always ask me, because I'm a learning guy, right, is where should I focus my development dollars? I always say, focus on your managers, right? Because you're going to have the biggest impact on culture and organization by focusing on managers, right? The other thing you got to remember is that the tool that managers have at their disposal are conversations. So the thing that managers do, like you think about what managers do that is going to have an impact, it's having conversations with team members, having conversations with the team as a whole, having conversations with other managers and other people inside the organization that facilitate the work getting done, right? So skillful conversations are what we want managers to be able to have. We want to increase their effectiveness with conversations. We know that great conversations have 3 components. And we know it's being able to ask great questions. So you're really asking great questions. Are you able to listen and listen in a way that you can individualize, right? So we know that one of the characteristics, probably the principal characteristic of great managers, is their ability to individualize, to be able to know this person's unique and to be able to shape the job and the environment around that person's unique talents, right? So when I'm listening as a manager, I'm not just listening so that person experiences being heard. I should do that. But in addition to that, I want to be listening. So I'm thinking about, how is this person unique? How am I going to shape the job and the projects and the role? And I'm going to coach this person relative to their individual talents, right? And then the last piece, so asking great questions, listening to individualize. And the third is taking action. That out of that the person has actions, they have an opening for action. And for me as the manager, I've got an opening for action, right? So if I go have conversations with my manager and then nothing changes, I'm going to be frustrated, right? So I want to go have conversations with my manager, and then things happen as a result of that, right? So we know that's what great managers do, is that the in those conversations is ask great questions, listen to individualize, and take action. The challenge I've found is not that managers sometimes don't know they should be a coach, but they don't know how to make the transition from where they are now to being a coach. So for a lot of managers, they're like, look, I've just told people what to do, and I wasn't very interested. And, I wasn't very interested, and I know I should be more interested, but I just haven't been. And I think it's going to be weird for people if I show up one day and say, I'm your coach. like they're all going to run for the hills, right? So I think the coaching that we've given people is, first of all, they've got to start to build a relationship where they're actually interested in those people. So it starts with having conversations about who that person is. And there's a guide. I should have held this up. I've held it up on other things. We sell this thing called the Individual Conversations Guide. We also teach it in our Leading High Performance Teams course. It is a terrific guide with 30 questions that managers can ask to get to know somebody, right? And it's some of the kind of questions are: what are your talents and strengths? Tell me what you think your talents are. What are your strengths? What motivates you? What's motivating for you? One of the killer questions that we came up with years ago is, what does your best day at work look like? What does your best day at work look like? What are the things that you're naturally drawn to? One of the things I always like to ask is, how do you organize your work? Tell me about your day and how you like to go about your day, because it gives me access to how somebody structures their work, how they think about their work. A great one is, how do you like to be recognized? The guy that I work for at Gallup right now, his name's Phil Roman. He leads several of our divisions of the company. And, I told him years ago how I like to be recognized, and he's remembered it all these years, right? And it's always so meaningful. One of the best things for me is personal notes, right? And man, he's remembered it, and it's always so meaningful when I get a note from him. Asking people, what are your goals, right? What impact do you want to have in your job? So you've got to know those things so you can start to shape that person's experience. And that's the beginning of a coach. Coaching is always, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but coaching is always based on a foundation of relationship. If you don't have a relationship, you can't coach. So we train coaches. If you're going to coach somebody, go build a foundational relationship. I always think about it like the foundation to a house, right? The bigger the foundation, the bigger house you can build, right? So you got a little foundation, you can only build a little house, right? So you got to build this big foundation of relationship, and part of it is just getting to know somebody and really listening. For me, it helps to take notes. I love just writing all that stuff down, because then it helps me to capture it. I find that I retain it better, right? And I think that, as we said before, strengths makes managers just smarter and more insightful, right? It's really the cheat sheet to the thing. So I took more than 3 minutes, Jim. Let me throw it back to you here.
No,
and we can wrap it up. Okay?
That's great. I did post a link in the chat to the Individual Conversation Reorder. You can buy those in packets from us if you want to get that done. A really well put together book. And when I was managing people directly, Dean, I love to have those. Steve Allen had mentioned, like, having baseball cards for your employees that have the key stats in them. I found those books helpful for me. I am not, even though I have Relator 9, I don't always remember all the details. And having a booklet to come back to, I could make my own, but it was just easy. We just have them, right? So just having them on hand, being able to writing the name of the person down, go back and review it if I need to. I found that to be really, really, really helpful to me. And I've got a lot of relationship building themes. So there's one of those things that, I find your advice, write it down, take some notes, do something where you can come back to it. I find that to be really, really helpful. Dean, anything else you'd add before we go?
It just sounds funny. Sometimes people are hesitant to take notes, but I will tell you, writing things down tells people that you care. When you stop to capture it as a way of communicating, I care about what you're saying to me.
With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available on our brand new Gallup Access platform. You can get access to that out at the new website, new address, gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. Tons of, by the way, brand new resources on that site as well. We had some individuals do some incredible work in that area. And I always get asked, hey, is there a one-pager on strengths? There is now. We have one out there for you. Right? Hey, what's the history of CliftonStrengths? Guess what? We have it for you. It's in the tab called History. Really easy to find. Lots of great information in the migration. I think a lot of folks missed all the resources we have available for them out there, and are a ton. If you've not gone through our CliftonStrengths site, you might want to. Of course, I'll remind you in the Facebook groups as well if you're asking me those questions. If you do have any questions that you need to answer to right away, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch all the recorded audio and video of this program and all the past Join us over at our YouTube channel. Just go Clifton Strengths, pretty easy to remember, on YouTube if you want to search for us there. Gallup Webcasts in any webcast player, Android, iPhone, whatever you're listening on, it's available there. You can find all our webcasts that are available. If you want to see a complete list of courses available for any of the learning, including our Boss to Coach training that is out there, you can get that courses.gallup.com. If you want to join us on our Facebook group, just facebook.com/groups/called to coach. And if that was too much, just hit pause. You can go back and play it again. I want to thank you for joining us today. I always enjoy these times, Dean. I always enjoy spending time with you, and I appreciate you and all that you do for the coaches. We'll do it again next time. Thanks for coming out. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.